Well, good morning. Good morning. I know that a lot of us, it's spring break and it's daylight savings, so it's going to be a little sparse this morning, but we are having some technical difficulties with our sound through our videos. And so normally there would be this really nice welcome video welcoming you here at the table, and it would be all this nice stuff. So I thought I would do it in person welcome this morning. So I want to thank you for joining us at the table. And to kick us off, we'll pray again later, but I'll go ahead and let's start us off with some prayer. Would you pray with me, please? God, thank you for this wonderful morning. Thank you for this wonderful people who are here. Thank you for these wonderful band members. God, I pray that as we worship you this morning, as we talk about our spiritual pathways, the ways we connect with both you and those around us, God, I just pray that you bless those conversations. God, help us to be aware that you are ever present, ever with us, now and going forward. God, please speak to our hearts this morning. May our words, may our songs, may your word inspire us today. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Good morning, church. Would you stand as we worship together this morning? Welcome to the table. Put your hands together. Waking up from the longest night, fixing my eyes on a new horizon. Joy before me, leave the past behind. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Boldly I run into your presence, faith like a child, known and protected here in your arms, where shame is unraveling, unraveling. You make me fearless, fearless. You call my heart out of the dark, fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless, fearless. I was living underneath gray skies, now I'm dancing in the light of heaven. Grace has found me, brought me back to life. There's no turning back, there's no turning back. Boldly I run into your presence, faith like a child, known and protected here in your arms, where shame is unraveling, unraveling. You make me fearless, fearless. You call my heart out of the dark, fearless, fearless. Finally free, your spirit makes me fearless, 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 fearless. I'm alive to praise you. I was made to love you. I'm alive to praise you. There's no turning back, there's no turning. Come on, lift your voice. I'm alive to praise you. I was made to love you. I'm alive to praise you. There's no turning back, there's no turning. I'm alive to praise you. I was made to love you. I'm alive to praise you. There's no turning back, no turning. Fearless, fearless. You call my heart out of the dark. Fearless, fearless, of you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. You have led me through the fire and in darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. Come on, do you believe it this morning? All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down and surrendered now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. How I long to breathe the air of heaven, where pain is gone and mercy fills the streets. To look upon the one who bled to save me, and walk with him for all eternity. There will be a day when all will bow before him. There will be a day when death will be no more, standing face to face with he who died and rose again. Holy, holy is the Lord. And every prayer we've prayed in desperation, the songs of faith we sang through doubt and fear. In the end, we'll see that it was worth it when he returns to wipe away our tears. There will be a day when all will bow before him. There will be a day when death will be no more, standing face to face with he who died and rose again. Holy, holy is the Lord. And on that day, we join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. And with one voice, 1,000 generations sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. And on that day, we join the resurrection and stand beside the heroes of the faith. With one voice, 1,000 generations sing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Forever he shall reign. So let it be today. We shout the hymn of heaven with angels and the saints. We raise a mighty roar. Glory to our God who gave us life beyond the grave. Holy, holy is the Lord. So let it be today. We shout the hymn of heaven, the angels and the saints. We raise a mighty roar. Glory to our God who gave us life beyond the grave. Holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy is the Lord. Father God, we stand in awe of your holiness. You're truly magnificent. God, I pray that you would be blessed and glorified in this time as we continue to worship with the word. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated.
Normally, we would have a video here, and the band would have time to get off, but since we're having some audio problems, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So, how many of you have ever been to a wedding? That's like everybody. I feel like everybody in the room has been to a wedding or probably seen a wedding on TV. Now, I want you to think about when you're at that wedding. So I want you to picture the wedding. For me, I'm going to talk about my first wedding and then some other ones, not personally, so I'm not like a first wife or anything, but like the first wedding I remember when I was a child. I want you to think of that wedding. I want you to think of where you were sitting. I want you to think of what you were doing. And so that wedding for me, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I should have asked my mom, but I think it was my parents' friends, Carmen and Mike. And I remember going to the wedding. We were in a big church. My mom may have even been in the wedding. But I'm sitting there, and they there's music playing, and all the people are coming in, sitting down and everything. And then at some point, right, this is my first wedding, so I don't know this. I'm sitting there, right, and the music plays, da, 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 right? And then everybody stands up, and I was like, what is happening? Right? Do you guys remember that the first time you were at a wedding? You stand up, and then everybody turns, and I was like, oh, what are we looking at, right? Like, what's over? And sure enough, what's happening? The bride's coming down the aisle. I remember in that moment, and actually several subsequent moments after that, like when they were saying the vows, or when they were talking to each other, I remember as a young child just sitting there and going, wow, this is, like there's something else happening. Like this just isn't a wedding. These aren't just words. That's not just music. There's something else that I'm experiencing today. Have any of you ever felt that? Now, I would describe my wedding as surreal. That's just because I don't remember most of it. But my wedding, personal wedding, with Stacy. Stacy's not here today. We have kids playing volleyball and dance and all of it. I have one in Austin, Texas, so she's not here today. But our wedding, I didn't actually experience that with our wedding, because I was in it, and you're nervous and all the stuff, and I'm not real bright, and so I decided to sing in my wedding, so I was really, like, nervous, and I was going to surprise you, but I started crying. Anyway, all the ridiculous things that I choose to do. But in that wedding and other ones that I've been a part of, and of course, as a pastor, I perform a ton of weddings every year. When we get to certain parts of it, I just have this overwhelming sense that there's something else going on. That I'm connected somehow, in some way, with something that has come before me, and to what I believe, and we'll make an argument today, that's something that's going to happen after me as well. So today we're we're continuing on in our second week of this series in this month called Don't Throw the Baby Out with the Bathwater. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? So, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is we're talking about our spiritual practices. During Lent, it's traditional for Christians to add something into their life. Now, somewhere along the way, this notion of removing things came into play. Now, that came into play because throughout the history of humankind, this is not new to us, we're busy, and we feel like we can't add one more thing. I mean, how many of you can relate to that? I say that every week. I can't add one more thing to my life. But I'm here to tell you, I believe our faith, our God, I believe, invites us to remember every Lent that we do need to add stuff back into our life. And so because of that, we use language, but I'm not sure if it's healthy language. Like, I'm giving something up for Lent. We never talk about what are we adding into our, that's the point of Lent, is we remember the spiritual practices. And I think in the absence of spiritual practices, because we talk about our bodies, we talk about ourselves as physical, as physicality, as atoms, as particles, subparticles, as quantum, as mega, however you want to describe all those things, we describe ourselves in that way, but we've lost the art of spiritual practices. And because of that, I think we struggle. And Lent is the time that we remember and we add those things back in. Or at least I hope with this series, I hope we're trying to. I hope there's something that we can identify in our life that we can add back into our daily lives as practices to access Spirit. Last week I talked about the Trinity. There's God Father, there's God the Son, and then there's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the thing that connects us to God. And if the greatest commandment is to love God, and then to love others, and then to love self, right, in that order, I believe that's very intentional, God, others, self. If we are to do that, if that's what's the best for us and best for those around us, we need to be practicing those ways. Spirit, right, is the thing that connects us to God. Jesus does this weird thing and breathes on people and says, even breath. Ruach is spirit. It's the thing that is in all of us. It's the thing that connects us to God. It connects us to the holy. So I'm hopeful that you will hear something in these next few weeks and go, oh, I'm going to practice that. I'm going to implement these spiritual practices, because in the removal of these practices, I believe we've gotten rid of them, but we've forgotten why we're doing it. That's why we've gotten rid of them. I don't need to do that anymore. And there's all kinds of spiritual practices. Last week, I encouraged all of you, and just to recap, Spiritual Pathways, it's an assessment I sent out an email the week before last, saying, take this and come next week. And so, just to recap that, there are certain ways in which we connect with the holy, we connect with God, the collective, however you want to describe that. There are several ways, and we call those pathways. So there's a naturalist. I'm a naturalist. I connect with God the most when I'm in nature. There's sensate. You draw near to God with your senses. There's traditionalist. You draw near to God with ritual and symbol. We're going to be focusing a lot on that ritual today. Caregiver, I'm also a caregiver. You draw near to God by serving and caring for others. Enthusiast, you draw near to God by celebrating and mystery. Activist, you draw near to God by bringing about social change. Contemplative, you draw near to God by adoration and devotion. Or intellectual, this is one of my favorite. I love to learn why things work. I went to school to be an engineer, so my brain works like an engineer. Hopefully. My wife might disagree with you, but I think my brain works like an engineer. And I want to know why things work the way they do. And so for me, my God is very intellectual. Right? I have to know, why do these things work like this? I'm super fascinated. I bought a book last year on quantum physics. Like, I can only understand about a quarter of it, but it's been wonderful. It's the part I do understand, right? So it's complicated. It's an advanced book. And so, but these things intrigue me. And in quantum science, you talk about mystery, you talk about supernatural. We're talking about supernatural later. What does that mean? Man, go to quantum physics. You'll start seeing some really weird things. I think it's describing consciousness and spirit and God. Just we're able to measure some of that. The point of last week was to get you to understand, how do you, as an individual, connect with God, right? So it's the way we recharge. It's the things that we do. It's really important that you know that. Today we're going to focus on, as a collective, right? As a community, as a church, what are the things we do to access God together as a group? Because our faith, sometimes people will describe their spiritual, right? I don't go to church, and that's fine. I'm not here to get you to go to church. I am here to get you to connect with God, with others, and yourself, right? These are the three things. This is the greatest commandment. So when people describe their spiritual, and I can find God in nature, I'm like, that is great, and that's a great first step. But there's two other steps to that, right? That's just the first one. That's how we recharge. That's how we speak. That's how we commune with God. But how do we connect with others in a communal way? And historically, throughout all of humanity, we perform rituals, right? Weddings being one of those. Now, there's many rituals that we perform, and we'll dig into what are those rituals. But how many of you, when I say ritual, what comes to mind? Give me something. This is supposed to be interactive, so give me, what's a ritual? What else do we do in culture that's ritualistic? Prayer. Keith is preaching in a few weeks, and we'll talk about prayer and meditation. Yes. What else? What? Communion. That's on my list. Yes. Now, when it comes to these practices, actually, I'll come to that later. Let's first dig into a little bit of why Jesus said that these things were very important. Like, what are the things that he did that led us to a place that told us that these were really important? So if you're following along, let's read from the Bible in John 2. So John is kind of like the outcast gospel, okay? So you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In seminary, we call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic gospels. Most likely, they had each other's scripts or some form of it, and so we see very similar language, and we see a lot of the same stories told in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In John, there's a whole different set of stories. There's a whole different way of talking about Jesus. He's the one that talks about Jesus as God more than the other three. And so there's a whole new experience with John. Now, I like to read John because when I read John, I feel like I'm experiencing something, right? And I believe that in our faith is to be practiced and experienced. So when we talk about worship, we're actually talking about practicing our faith. Now, unfortunately, the term worship, many of you, if I were to say, did you go to worship this week? You would say, no, I missed church, or maybe I went to church. So we've boiled worship down to like a Sunday morning thing. But actually, worship, as defined in the Bible, is people's experience with God worship is just one of many ways in which, Sunday morning worship is just one of many ways that we experience God. And for a lot of people, they're never going to worship on a Sunday morning experience. I think the church's job, our job, is to help you on your journey. It's not to provide it for you. Like, it's not our job to provide you an experience every single week in your homes. That's your job, to get together, to know how you connect with God, to do rituals together, to live life together. Jesus, we know this was important because he spent most of his time not in a synagogue and not in a church. While he did go to those things on occasion, most of Jesus' time was spent with people around tables, in their living rooms, in their houses, in their places of business. I'm going to read about Jesus and an experience he had that we read about in John. Now, this experience we would probably describe as mystical or supernatural. Now, what makes something supernatural? In the natural world, we read about things, we can describe things, we can look at atoms and subatomic particles and look at what makes up a thing. That's the natural world. When something appears to supersede the natural world, we can't quite explain it, we call that supernatural. And in John's gospel, we see a lot more supernatural things and experiences that they have than we do in the other gospels. So this morning, we're going to read about the very first supernatural event that we read about in the Bible with Jesus, okay? So, John 2, start at the very beginning. 3 days later, at a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee, Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples were guests also. So Jesus, his disciples, and his mom are at a wedding, okay? Now, this next part I really like, the next few lines, because we get to see the humanity of Jesus and of Jesus' family. And when I say humanity, I really mean dysfunction, okay? So, y'all relate to this. When they started running low on wine at the banquet, Jesus' mother told him they're just about out of wine. So she looks at Jesus and says, hey, Jesus, they're out of wine. So I love what Jesus says. Now just listen to this. How many of you have said this to one of your parents? Jesus says, is that any of our business, mother? Yours or mine? This isn't my time. Don't push me. So what is Jesus saying? Mom, get off my case. Like, I'm not doing the water to wine thing. Stop it. And what does Jesus' mom do? She's poking him with a stick. Come on, Jesus, do it. That's what's happening. Now, go read this. John could have left those details out. Like, he didn't need to have all these details about Jesus' mom and Jesus and this interaction they had about Jesus. Like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not going to do this. And so, like a good mother, she listens to Jesus. And so, so she went away telling the servants, whatever he tells you, do it. Right? So she doesn't listen to Jesus. She goes to the servants. She's like, my son's going to take care of this. Right? He does his thing. It's complicated. Can't really describe it. But listen to him and do what he asks. So 6 stoneware pots were there, used by the Jews for ritual washings. We're going to come back to ritual washings here in a little bit because we do this as a ritual, right? In the Christian world, we have ritual washings. Each held 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus ordered the servants, fill the pots with water. So I want to go back to that. 6 jars, each one holding 20 to 30 gallons of water. So if you do some quick math, just take the 20 times 6, it's 120 gallons of water, okay? That's a lot. Now, in Jesus' day when they had a wedding, like it wasn't like what we would do today, where it's an afternoon or maybe even an all-day thing. Like when they had a wedding, it was days long, maybe even a week long, and they just, there was the ritual part of it, but then they celebrated and they partied hard. Now, how long they've been going at it, we're not sure, but we know it's been a while. Why? Because they're out of wine, right? And what I find interesting is that Jesus could have been like, no, they're fine. They've had enough to drink, like John needs to calm down, okay? He doesn't. He's like, fine, mother, I'll do it, right? And then, let's keep reading, okay? So 120 gallons at a minimum, up to 180 gallons of water. Now fill the pitchers and take them to the hosts, right? So they filled them with water, and then they filled these pitchers. Jesus said it, and they did it. And when the hosts tasted the water that had become wine, right? So here's this supernatural thing that happens. Everybody's experiencing something supernatural. He didn't know what had just happened, but the servants, of course, knew. He called out to the bridegroom, everybody I know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests had their fill, brings in the cheap stuff, but you saved the best till now. This story, right, regardless of how you feel, because, some people struggle with what we would call miracles in the Bible. Some people are like, I don't know about all that. I describe them as supernatural. I don't know, maybe everybody was drunk and they just thought they were drinking wine. I don't know what happened exactly. I can't describe it to you. Scientifically, I can't tell you what happened. But I know at that wedding that Jesus was at with his disciples and his mother, that was probably a week long, they're getting after it. And after probably a couple days, Jesus is like, yeah, we should keep this going. This, whatever this is, right? Whatever was happening at that wedding, at that ritualistic event, was important enough for Jesus to step in and to say, let's keep this going. He looked around and saw that there was something important happening, and he said, let's keep this going. Let's keep this party rocking. He did. I mean, he could have left. He could have said, no, these crazy people, they've been drinking for days. Like, they need to stop. There was something happening in those moments. There was some kind of connection, I believe, that was happening with those people. Jesus knew it, and he actually helped them to continue along in that journey. I find that interesting. I find that idea exceeds our natural ability for what we can normally do. It is supernatural. And I believe whatever they experienced that day or in the subsequent days, I'm not sure how many people were there, but to drink 120 to 180 gallons of wine seems like that might take a little bit. There was something amazing going on. Jesus is pointing us in the direction that there are rituals in life that we have that are really important. So in Jesus' life, when we read about the supernatural things that happened around him, this is the very first thing we read about. It's the first one. It points us into the direction, I believe, that rituals, that the things we do, have a lot of value. And often we might do them, but we've forgotten why we do them. How many of you have ever heard somebody say, and I'm not going to attack anybody, but I'm going to talk about what's happening in our social norms right now. I do a lot of weddings, but I often hear people say, I don't need to get married. It's just right. It's just a piece of paper. Now, I would tell you, it's not just a piece of paper. If you think marriage is just a piece of paper, you've lost the whole meaning of why we're having the marriage in the first place, why we're participating in this, why we have that ceremony, why we're practicing this ritual. The marriage ceremony is something that people have done for thousands and thousands of years. Many of your generation before you have gotten married, and many, hopefully, after your generation will get married. When you are choosing to participate in a marriage and a wedding ceremony and the party thereafter, you're participating with what I like to call some kind of collective memory. Now, we'll get to that in just a minute, but I want to talk about what are the different rituals. A few of you mentioned some of them. Rituals always take us from a place, now this is true to our story, to our core. Every ritual, when you really think about it, rituals are helping us to access memory, some kind of memory, right? So when we do something, we're remembering that there's something about this, that there's a reason why we're doing it. There's a collective memory that's associated with this. The other thing that's happening is in all rituals, there's something that is dying, and then there's something that's being rebirthed. Okay? So, we have rituals here in America. We call them holidays, right? We have a holiday for everything. We have a holiday for Cupid, right? But we have a holiday. So, some of the big holidays that we have, that we all celebrate, well, maybe not all of us, but many of us, are holidays like the 4th of July, right? Our independence. A lot of us sit around a dinner table and eat a Thanksgiving meal. At Christmas time, now we aligned Christmas. Historians don't think Jesus was born in December. If that's a spoiler alert, I'm sorry. He was probably most likely born in the spring sometime. They don't think he was actually born in December. The Christians aligned what they were doing with what the rest of the world was doing, which is what? What's going on at the end of December? The winter solstice, right? Throughout time, people have celebrated the solstices and the equinoxes. So, for us, though, as Americans, we celebrate our independence from what? England. What was happening? The way we used to do life was what? Dying. We didn't like doing what? Paying taxes. What do we still not like? Oh, right? We still do it. Anyway, so it was the death of an old way, and we celebrate that through rituals by blowing stuff up. I'll be the first to tell you I love it. I think it's wonderful. I'm a kid when it comes to on July 4th, I go at 7 o'clock just before it gets dark, and they'll discount everything 50%, and I'll buy a bunch of stuff, right? Because I like to blow stuff up. It's a waste of money, but it's fun. Now, for just blowing stuff up, we don't remember what we're actually celebrating. We're celebrating independence from England, right? And maybe we should be blowing up money because that's what our taxes do today, but anyway, it's fine. Thanksgiving. Now, some people think that we celebrate Thanksgiving, we attribute it to some kind of peaceful notion between early settlers and the Native Americans. But really, Thanksgiving is much, much broader than that, because there are also movements to try to get rid of that. But, historically, in the fall, masses of people throughout time have gotten together because it's the time of harvest. And they often will sit around a table and give thanks, right? Actually, next week, we're going to dig into that. Gratitude, thankfulness, is a practice that we struggle with. And we'll dig into the why behind that, but we'll talk about that next week. But most of us sit around a table sometime in the fall, usually around Thanksgiving, and we remember. So it's the death of an old way of doing things, right? Being grateful is transitioning, right? I'm not going to do it that way no more. I'm going to be thankful for it, and we're going to do it a different way. We celebrate the seasons. Again, if it's the winter solstice, winter solstice means that the nights are no longer going to get longer. They're going to get shorter, and the days will get longer. We're coming up on spring equinox next week, right? We just lost an hour of sleep tonight, which I'm mad about. I'm sure some of you are too. So, these are rituals we do to remember, to celebrate something, to remember something, and it's always the death of something so that something else can be reborn. Birth itself, right? When my kids were born, right? Or my first daughter, right? We live over not too far from Lake Jacoma. Went out to Lake Jacoma, right? And I took her and I held her over the cliff, and Elton John started singing, and oh wait, that's Lion King. Nobody's saying Lion King when I think of birth, rituals, that's what I think of. The Lion King, it's a great little circle alive, and they're holding little Simba. But actually, birth is really important, and we celebrate it. Now, we do it in different ways now. In my tradition growing up in our faith, we had baby blessings. Now, often, a lot of times, we baptize babies now, and we'll talk about baptism here in just a second. But we used to bless babies. Now, we still celebrate. What do we have? We have baby showers, right? And as a kid, I thought we were giving babies baths as a collective. I didn't realize what was happening. But we do baby showers, and then what's happening to a baby when it's being born? Right? Death of the way it used to exist, an amniotic fluid inside of a woman, right, comes out. Now, before my first daughter was born, everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's the most beautiful thing to watch your child be born. How many of you have heard that, right? It's so beautiful. You're going to love it, right? And I get there, and if I could have ripped my eyes out, I would have. It's horrid. It's horrid. My own wife, we're sitting there, in the stirrups, not to get too, legs, all of the stuff, and all of the stuff that comes along with that. Those of you that have children know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a mess. And she's there, and the doctor's like, do you want a mirror so you can look? And she's like, not if you want me to keep pushing. She's like, I don't want to see that, right? So the visual part of it is disgusting. But that baby's born, and you're holding that little thing in your arms, my little daughter. I was aware in every single one, in those moments, that this isn't just my daughter being born. Every human through all of time, unless you're some weird science experiment, most of us have been born the same way, right? That somebody carried us, that life grew inside of another human being. And when we're experiencing that birth, when it's not us, when we get to watch it for somebody else, we get to hold that baby, we're not just experiencing our kid being born. We're experiencing something that all of us have a collective, and I believe there's a collective memory, and that when you're in those moments and when you get to experience those things, that's what's beautiful. The visual effect, right? For those of you who haven't been through it, don't watch. Just hold the baby afterwards. It's fine. It's the same experience. But there's something magical, something mystical, something supernatural that is happening in those moments. And that's just straight from birth. There's other things that we do, right? Again, the death of something old, birth is literally coming into new life. And in our Jewish tradition, right, there's circumcision. This is kind of like a rite of passage, but it's a ritual that we perform. And also in a Jewish community, when you come to the age of sexual maturity, there are events for both boys and girls, right? It's the death of your old way of life as a child, and you're now embraced as a man or a woman. Now, let's talk about baptism. So I read a book, like I usually do, in preparation for this series. And the book is about science and spirituality. And it's this guy who was an atheist who started performing spiritual practices because in secular culture, people are embracing all the spiritual practices that the church has done for thousands of years. If you don't believe me, go and Google it. It's happening everywhere. Organizations like Google and Facebook have times of meditation before they start meetings, right? Like we would pray before church. They have time of quiet and meditation before meetings. The people are giving thanks at meals because it aids in digestion. All these spiritual practices that we've done for millennia, that we knew there was something important, like the secular world, is catching on to this, and they're doing these things. So I'm reading this book, and he's trying to connect the two worlds, because I believe that we're not just things, and we're not just spirit, that we're both one and the same, and that these practices join those, and they connect us with God and other people. And so this book is really intriguing, and so he gets it apart, and he talks about, historically, there's been ritual washings, and water's always been significant. And he starts talking about, how do we describe John? John is John the Baptist, right? Or John the Baptizer. Now, John got that title because why? Because he was baptizing people. In the book, he describes John as the drowner. And here's why. How many of you have ever heard of a near-death experience? An NDE. Ever heard of this? Now, they happen in our culture all the time. Historically, we haven't seen a lot of them because usually if you physically die, 100 years ago, you just died. Now we have machines that can bring us back, that can sustain us. We have medicines that can do amazing things. We can restart our hearts with defibrillators, right? So we've seen a rise in the last 50 years of near-death experiences. There's been studies done on these things. Go Google this. Go read about this. There are commonalities in near-death experiences, or NDEs. So in an NDE, often somebody sees a light. Somebody sees a tunnel. Somebody feels like they are participating, or there's a group of people, there's a collective, or maybe they'll see loved ones that have gone on before them. Now, that's not always true. You will read about people that don't have great experiences, but they will describe common things. They'll describe an out-of-body experience or a tunnel or something, and it scares them, and so it's not a good experience for them, right? Those of us that are control freaks, we may not like that. But usually it's a common thing, and it's a common way to describe it, and it's usually good. These are near-death experiences, okay? So what he makes the argument of, he goes, in a near-death experience, right, we die and emerge as and come back as something else. People often come back from these experiences, they write books about it, they make movies about it, and they talk about it. And it usually changes their life because something inside of them, right, or physically has died and come back, has been rebirthed as something else. So the argument he makes in the book, he says, I think John the Baptizer was John the Drowner. He goes, I think somebody knew that these experiences, and it's a theory, right? This is nowhere in the Bible. We don't find this in the Bible. But his argument for it is, he says, people are probably having near-death experiences by almost drowning. And you ever seen two people like take somebody down, right? Maybe they just held them down just a little bit longer. It's okay to laugh at that. Yeah, now, he's serious, though. He thinks that may have been how it started. So what happens is, within 100 years, we go from full immersion, because baptism starts as immersion. Right? I grew up in a tradition where we could only immerse. We couldn't do the sprinkle thing. But by the 2nd century, right, AD, by the 2nd century, we already see that infants are being baptized. So we're seeing sprinkling and the dumping of water. And so it changed. Let's fast forward to the 16th century, so the 1500s. In the 1500s, we find this thing called the Spanish Inquisition. This is the church doing not so nice things to people, right? So there's this movement that happens at the same time. How many of you have ever heard of the Anabaptists? You ever heard that phrase? The Anabaptists emerge in the 1500s, and Anna means right, to do again, so to baptize again. They start immersing people, and they start doing this practice, right? And the church doesn't like it because they've gone to sprinkling. And so the Spanish Inquisition, they start killing people. And so how many of you have heard of waterboarding? The powers that be said, if these people are going to change our practice of baptism, then they're going to die from water. So the practice of waterboarding was created by the Spanish Inquisition, and they would put them on a board, put a cloth in their mouth, and dump water on them. Why? Because when you waterboard somebody, there's some kind of experience you have, and you will come clean and spill your guts. Now, this is a bad practice that probably still happens today. Like we know about some of this, right? But that all came out of the church. This idea. Now we look to baptism mainly as symbol. I think we have 2 baptisms on Easter this year, so I guess we'll see. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to hold anybody underwater. But it's an interesting way to think about the rituals and why we do them. Now, I don't know if John was actually like holding people under a little bit longer. What I do know is that when Jesus does this, he's adamant that he even chooses to be baptized. There's a ritual that we do, and that it's all about death of the old, and then something new should emerge. That is why we practice these things. What else do we have? So somebody mentioned communion, right? Jesus says, a new commandment I give you, live life a different way. We talked about marriage, right? Marriage is the death of what? Fun. And so, I'm kidding, that's a joke. My wife's not here, I can get away with it. Marriage is the death of being single, right? You're no longer who you were, now you are joined. You come together and become one. That's the actual biblical quote, right? That's what is happening in a marriage, the death of the old. And of course, even in death itself, it is the movement on to whatever's next after this life. And so what do? We come together and we tell stories. We remember the person. We remember the good things that they did. There's something that's happening in these holy moments that I believe are holy. And being holy just means that we are becoming whole, right? We're in the process of becoming whole. That there are these moments when we're accessing something outside of ourselves. Now, there's whole groups, historically in culture, there's another way to access this. How many of you have ever heard of like microdosing? Okay? This is taking psychedelic drugs, right? And they will microdose. And so historically, there have been groups of people in different cultures that have taken these hallucinogenic drugs and that they believe it connects them to something, right? So whatever it does, chemically in the body. But we are finding there's whole groups of people. There's church, not here in America, but there's churches in other parts of the world that part of their spiritual practice is they drink ayahuasca, I think is one of them. I'm not saying that right probably, but there's elixirs, there's things that they can smoke, there's things they can do, right? Now, I'm not telling everybody to go out and to try that. If a person were to do that, usually they're guided through a process, right? There's a mentor. There's somebody that helps you. And there's whole groups of people that believe they are finding a connection to God and to other people through this process. It's a practice that they have. I mean, our Native Americans would smoke peyote, right, and have spiritual experience. I mean, there's a whole slew of arguments to be made for this is not something that's new. People aren't just now discovering this. This is something that has happened throughout all of human history. People have practiced this in a way. And again, not to just do it for that experience, but to experience the collective, the whole, and you're guided through it. You're guided through it by somebody who's done it before you and can reintroduce you back in so that you don't lose yourself in some of these moments. I honestly think in all rituals, we should have people that are doing it with us, that are guiding us through it so that we can reintegrate into our cultures. I just have some fun facts actually from the book. So even in our language is even ritualistic in nature. So when we say hello or goodbye to somebody, these are greetings or prayers or blessings with people. And I didn't even realize this. So I think I'd heard this one. Goodbye is just an abridged form of God be with you, right? So we're actually, when we say goodbye to somebody, we're not just saying goodbye. We're saying God be with you, right? But how many of us have forgotten that? We just use the language. We forget that there's actually a meaning behind it. We shake hands. Now, handshaking, who knows how handshaking originated? You shook somebody's hand so that they knew they didn't have a weapon, right? So it was a symbol of peace. Our Jewish brothers and sisters have this term called shalom, which is a blessing to you, like peace be with you or be on you. When we say farewell to somebody, again, we're giving them a blessing. The French have a term, adieu, which means to God, like Dios, right? To God. Go to God. I commend you to God. Spanish have adios. It's the same thing, right? Dios, deity, God. Go be with God. The French have au revoir, which is see you later. German, auf Wiedersehen. Italian, arrivederci, right? All these sayings are language that are all focused on go be with. We have the term God, but God is different to all of us, right? So go be a part of that. Go access that. And the literal saying of goodbye or see you later, we're telling people go be with that thing that connects you. This collective memory, this thing we access when we perform rituals like weddings and baptisms, and we observe communion, and all these things. So, I'll geek out just for a second here. I'm fascinated that we can now map the human genome. We haven't been able to for a very long time, actually. So we can look at DNA, right? Double helix, and we can look at DNA, and it's the memory, right? Or it's the blueprint for who we are. And we can look at that, and it will tell us who we are, right? It's the code that makes us our physicality of who we are and what we are. And that's our atoms and our cells and everything like that, right? And what happens over time is those cells, they can mutate, they can change form. This is really what cancer is. And over time, some doctors will say cancer is inevitable for everybody, some form of some kind of mutation of your cells. And that mutation, right, that absence from that information, that deviation from that memory of DNA causes pain, suffering, and even death. I believe there's a spiritual DNA, just like there is a physical DNA. There is a collectiveness that we access through our spiritual practices of those who have gone before us. I don't think it's just a special moment in a wedding. I believe we're accessing some kind of spiritual memory. And I believe science is finally starting to catch up with it. I mean, people have near-death experiences, right? They'll be hooked up to brain monitors, and they'll have this experience, and they'll describe it, and they remember it. And guess what's not happened on the brain monitors? There's been no record of any brain activity. Now, science can't explain what's going on. I believe that's consciousness. I believe that's spirit. I believe that's something else going on. Go and look up that there are things in science, crystals being one of them. There was a sugar that until 1949 only existed as a liquid. They were able to crystallize it, and then magically, supernaturally, all over the world, in different places in time, this substance began to crystallize. I know that sounds weird. I'm a science guy. I'm super skeptical, right? But I do believe there's more than just matter to us. There is something that is supernatural, that exceeds matter, and I believe there's a collectiveness, and there's a way to access that, and we do that through our spiritual practices. And the forgetting or the doing away with all these spiritual practices, I think we've lost so much of our humanity. We've lost our connection with God. We've lost our connection with each other. And I hope over the next few weeks you're able to do things that reconnect you. How many of you grew up doing Easter egg hunts at your house? Okay. Now, in my immediate household, I grew up with a faith that did not embrace Easter eggs because they were pagan. Right? Even though there's a long tradition of Easter eggs, and it just means a new life and spring, and yes, there was a pagan god, and the rabbit was a symbol, but the egg represents new life, okay? But I did go to my aunt's house, right, the pagans, yeah, and we hunted for Easter eggs. My mom didn't love it, I don't think, but we did it every year. I have great memories of it. Now, is it just because it's just me hunting for eggs, or in the act of doing this, am I accessing something that is beyond me, that goes beyond the practice of me doing it? Every year, the day before Easter on Saturday, so this year on April 8th, we're going to do an Easter egg hunt. We always do an Easter egg hunt, right? Every 15 or 20 minutes, I forget what it is, we put out eggs, and we go through thousands and thousands of eggs. And we always come to you all and say, we need your help to participate in this. You have an opportunity to participate with thousands of other people, not only the day of, but thousands of people that have gone before us, that have taken Easter egg home and filled them with what? Yeah, not the Smarties. Those aren't the good ones, okay? My kids, they get home, this isn't the good candy, and they like chuck it, But we have Easter eggs out there, and I always tell people, take 50, take 100 with you. Fill them with candy, bring it back so that we can participate with those in our community. Now, that's a little thing, but I think these little things, I think they matter. If you've ever watched kids hunt for Easter eggs, right? I mean, there's always one that knocks the other kids down, but they're having so much fun. And for me, it's the opportunity, while we may think it's an Easter egg, right? Some people talk about the cosmos, right, as the cosmic egg. But for me, it's a time to remember that we all come from a form of an egg. Actually, all of science tells us what? What I love about science is, science tells us we all come from what? One infinitesimally small point. And we all come from this one single point. And there's these laws. And what are these laws? They're eternal. Right? To me, they're describing the God that we describe in just a slightly different way. That we all come from the same place. And it's not just our physicality. There's a spirit inside all of us. And the way we access that is by participating with each other. And the thing I'm asking you to do today is to fill Easter eggs with chocolate, the good chocolate, preferably with peanut butter. Wrapped candy. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. So on your way out today, not only do I want you to remember the spiritual practices, I hope you go home and at your tables around dinner tonight, like, man, that pastor talked about a wedding, and I hope you share a story with the rest of your family about maybe a wedding you went to, maybe a time you felt like you were a part of something that was bigger than you. But as you do those things, as you take eggs on the way out, and as you fill them with candy and bring them back, as we think about all those things, let's go to God in prayer. God, thank you for the opportunity to love in our community, God, but most importantly, to access this thing inside of us. God, we know in Ecclesiastes 3, in your word, it says that eternity has been set into the hearts of all people. God, help us to find that eternity. God, that we can access you, we can access members, we can access everything, and it stands outside of space and time. That, God, we know that when we're a part of that, that it's something beautiful, but it's not always easy. God, help us to see beyond ourself, just our material self. Help us to see that inside all of us, there's something more, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful. It's supernatural. God, help us embrace that. Help us to embrace these practices. Help us to live them out every single day of our life. God, and it's in your name that we pray. Amen.
We go ahead and stand as we continue worship. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You've been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. And you've been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all to me. And you've been so, so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, no, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
How about some love for that? Man, that was. As you go home, as you sit around your tables, I hope you're able to share these stories. I hope you're able to access this collective, this memory, this spiritual DNA of your lives. So go, grab some eggs, and go in peace.